Hi there, podcast fans. My name is Nick LaFleur, and you're listening to Age of Agility. This week, we're asking, what role does building an equitable workplace have in your team's performance? How can companies truly develop their workforces into a diverse, inclusive, and welcoming organization from top to bottom? And how do organizations hold themselves accountable to this kind of work? We all know that bringing more and diverse voices to the workplace is important, but many organizations just don't get it right, especially in the tech space. This week, we're joined by Andrea Forsht, Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Impact at Quickbase. In this great conversation, we talk with her about her career, the role of D&I work in organizations, and how companies that support and raise more and diverse voices are often the ones with the most engaged employees. I don't want to give too much away in advance, so take a listen and enjoy our conversation with Andrea Forsht.
Welcome to the Age of Agility. This is a show where we talk to people who are facing unique challenges with an agility mindset. We'll learn from industry leaders, business and IT professionals, and even check in on our colleagues from time to time. Stay tuned as we explore the age of agility. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Age of Agility podcast. My name is Shannon Curran, and I am still your host. And we are super excited today to bring one of our colleagues actually onto the podcast, Andrea Forsht, who is our Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Impact. Andrea, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, obviously, your work has been incredibly at the forefront, specifically over the last year and a half. I would love to hear a little bit about your journey to where you are now and sort of what you do here at Quickbase.
Sure. So I joined Quickbase about 8 months ago now, July of last year, August of last year. So I accepted my offer in July, I came on board in August. And it feels like it's been kind of a whirlwind ever since. I come to this D&I work from philanthropy and employee engagement, to be honest with you. So I started my career as a grants manager, working on strategic portfolios for foundations, corporate foundations, and kind of pivoted a little bit about halfway through my career to be more focused around employee engagement. So taking some of the social movement work that we were doing kind of from the philanthropy side of things, bringing it in-house and really working on culture initiatives for organizations. And part of that was diversity and inclusion work. And I've been fortunate to be able to kind of carry through some of that philanthropic expertise kind of through the social impact work that I've been able to do, both through employee volunteerism and grant making. And here at Quickbase, it's taken on a different form in terms of product donation and really thinking about how our product can kind of help to bridge gaps, as it relates to tech and exposure to the tech fields and spaces and technology skills that are really needed to kind of upskill communities. So it's pretty cool. At Quickbase, I'm focused, like you said, on diversity, inclusion, and social impact. We were joking earlier that my job title is also my job description. So really focused on, kind of how are we thinking about talent within the organization? How are we creating an environment that is inclusive and welcoming where people feel a sense of belonging? How are we looking at equity in terms of, kind of the policies that we have within the organization and how people are experiencing the organization? And then really kind of how are we using our products and our platforms to really kind of create a ripple effect, kind of across the tech space and the community. So it's been a wild journey so far, and it's been really great being a part of Quickbase.
Small task that you have. So
yeah.
Small scope.
Yeah.
So I know you've actually been doing some interviews with some women across the company for Women's History Month. And one of the big questions has been who have been the mentors that you've had in your career. So I'd love to hear if you have anyone specific that you've kind of looked to as a guidance throughout your career.
Yeah. So, well, I have to give a nod to my dad. I know that he listens to a lot of these podcasts that we do here at Quickbase. So my dad's definitely been an inspiration for me. I think his ability to build relationships really quickly, develop trust, I think is something that I've tried to kind of emulate in my own career. I think that's how I've been able to do the job that I do oftentimes as a team of one. Your ability to build relationships quickly in organizations and start to leverage other folks to kind of, help move the work along is really important. When I was early in my career, I came across the term Franken mentor, which has always kind of stuck with me. So kind of not necessarily having one person in particular that's kind of been the person that I've looked to, but having kind of multiple people that I've taken things from, both good and bad. So I've had, kind of amazing managers, amazing people that I've worked with who I've been like, I love their ability to speak and present. So I want to kind of follow that. Or, I really appreciate this person's critical thinking. How can I learn from that? But I've also had people that I've been like, ooh, like I don't really love that behavior. I don't love how that's making me feel. How can I be really careful not to replicate that in my own career? So I think as I've grown, I think I've really tried to, kind of think about how do I take the good, acknowledge the bad, and try to kind of gather what I can, those nuggets along the way to kind of continue to move forward.
That's very thoughtful. I think there is one of the, as you sort of go on in your career too, you realize like not all advice is good advice. Not all advice, like there's definitely, it takes a lot of learning, I think, and growing. Absolutely. I know I've seen that for myself as well. I'm sure I'll look back 10 years from now being like, I had no idea what I was doing. So
Yeah,
exactly.
I liked we all grow. We all grow.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So as this sort of practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion has started to be built in a lot of organizations, right? Some organizations already had, chief diversity officers, or they were working on sort of this work. Maybe it was called something different. What are sort of some of the misconceptions you found as you're starting to build a practice for this, specifically in tech?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that it's a nice to have and not, kind of core to how an organization should operate. I think a lot of times people see it as maybe the warm and fuzzies, it's we just want to make people feel good. But I think it goes beyond that. The term that they've been talking a lot about, kind of in the research lately is moving kind of from the business case, this helps, increase revenue, this helps with retention, this helps with, the bottom line of the organization, to kind of moving to a place of psychological safety. As employees have been dealing with COVID-19, as we've been kind of dealing with the aftermath of George Floyd and the anti-Asian racism that we've been seeing across the country, I think, now more than ever, employees are bringing a lot with them into the workplace. And the workplace looks different. And so really, we have to be more proactive. It can't just be business as usual. The things that we used to rely on to create culture within an organization, we don't have those same tools. So we've really had to pivot not only in this remote space, but also with all the things that were kind of being thrown at us over the course of 2020 and into 2021. And so I think, now as businesses are really thinking about, okay, well, where should we be investing? Where should we be, kind of really kind of diving deep? I think DEI is a practice that goes beyond just, how are we addressing, Black people? How are we addressing women? To really kind of how are we thinking about our organization and really creating a holistically inclusive culture? And I think that's really where the work is headed. So as you said, I think in the past, these positions have been nice to haves. They've been maybe the first that were cut from budgets, or they've been somebody's side job, rather than kind of a full-time role. And now you're kind of seeing these roles kind of coming into their own a little bit now. And I think hopefully this is going to be a sustained practice where this will stay kind of top of mind. This will stay a key element of how organizations are really functioning.
There's a few things there that I think will really resonate with folks too. And as we create more diverse workforces too, which we all know is like, I think would be hard to say is not the right thing to do. Like, obviously we know it's the right thing to do, right? That this work is just going to become more and more important because everyone's coming to the workplace, wherever that is, with such different perspectives and different backgrounds. And so as you think about inclusivity, it just gets bigger and bigger, right? You have such it's so nuanced what each person is bringing with them to the workforce. I know we talked about this with a few of our other guests around managing teams. Like this year has just been such a wild time to manage teams of human beings because it is just been, you have to really figure out like, where is the line of how much do you want to coach? How much do you want, like, and how do you build sort of an environment where people feel included, like they can truly do their best work in a time where best work is definitely a very hard thing
very much
to do some days,
Yeah, no, I think too, we've gone through this transition from being, a mostly in the office workforce to now being a totally remote workforce. And I think, come this summer, we're going to come to another transition where you're going to have an even more distributed workforce. So I don't think there's going to be a time when people are back in the office 5 days a week, 9 to 5. Like, I think it's going to flex more. And so that's going to require kind of another shift in terms of how are we engaging this, workforce. It's not static. It's constantly moving. So you have maybe 50% of your workforce in the office one day, but then it's a different 50% the next day, so, and then you have remote employees, which I think one of the silver linings in this COVID-19 space that we're in has been, we're remote, so we can think about talent a little bit differently. And so you're
Yeah.
seeing more organizations starting to think about, I don't need just the best talent in Boston or the best talent in Salt Lake City, but I can look to see, where's the best talent for Quickbase, regardless of location. And I mean, I myself sit in Minneapolis, so I'm not located in either one of our, kind of areas. And it hasn't been a hindrance in this, time that we've all been remote. But I think it'll be interesting to see kind of how that fluxes and changes as we kind of move back to maybe a more office-based culture, I guess.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I often think about sort of this idea of going back to normal that
Yeah,
which
yeah.
a lot of people like to say. And I think there's been a really interesting perspective on like, we've had a lot of time to think
Hmm.
over the last year and some change about like, was that normal truly where we wanted to be? Like,
Right.
is that, or have we really evolved so much over the last year out of adaptation and the need to sort of seeing how resilient human beings can truly be, right? And
Hmm.
communities can be. And having these conversations that maybe we were too busy for
Yeah.
before. I know anyone listening on the audio, I just used air quotes because I don't want you to think I actually meant that. That these conversations just they've become so important now, and I know I can only hope that they will become sort of ingrained in our culture as we move forward and as things start to look a little more like we historically remembered them looking. I would love to hear your perspective on your work moving into sort of as our community continues to grow and as companies start to get more and more adaptable about where people are located. I know you were saying earlier that it is going to look different. Do you have any sort of hypotheses of how your work will change?
It's hard to say because I think this work is a moving target in general. I think so much of it is there's some core things, I think to the role, really thinking about, recruitment and attraction strategies, thinking about, policies within an organization, but then, it's also responding, kind of as current events are happening that we need to kind of have a position on as we need to be thinking about, how are different members of our Quickbase community feeling safe and included and heard. I think kind of going to this summer and kind of looking at what the future is going to look like, I think there's going to be a lot around women in the workforce coming up. I think, we've seen crazy numbers of women dropping out of the workforce during COVID-19 as, the primary, kind of caregivers to children, having to work with virtual learning, environments and trying to kind of think through, how are we managing children and work and whatever else, and so I think that's going to be really interesting as we try to get some of these women who maybe left the workforce back into the workforce. I think about a policy that we rolled out at another company that I was at before, and it was a maternity leave policy, and it was a fabulous policy, and it was great because you saw the uptick in women that were, feeling good about, being able to go out and have their babies and have time to spend bonding. But when it came back to coming back to the office, what we found was that these women were dropping out within the first year back. And that was staggering. And what I think was happening was that while we were great about, the maternity leave piece of it, we really weren't thinking about how does that woman's, kind of experience change coming back to the office as a mother or as a mother again, kind of as you add more children to your family, dynamics change, needs change. So what are those things that we can be doing that are going to be really impactful and welcoming for women as they're coming back into the organization, not just from a pay equity standpoint, but also from an inclusive benefits standpoint as well.
Yeah, that is sort of one of those side effects that we've seen over the last year that I had not even really thought about, right? You think about just it all becoming too much, right? And
Hmm.
what do you have to drop the thing that you can, right? Like
Right.
you're obviously there's a requirement to continue parenting. So it
Yes.
is definitely, yeah, hopefully. But I do think that's a really great point of things that you're going to have to probably start to manage as things start to, reintegrate into in-person Would love to hear a little more about sort of some of the levers that you're currently sort of trying to pull at Quickbase, specifically the work that you're doing to build a more inclusive community.
Yeah, absolutely. So going into this year, we've kind of set up kind of three big pillars of work from a D&I perspective. And so the first one really is really about kind of that attraction and hiring strategy, thinking about our funnels a little bit differently. So we haven't yet started talking exactly about what our specific numbers are, but what I can say is that our goals are really around underrepresented minorities here in the US at the individual contributor level, and then looking at women globally, both at the individual contributor level and at the manager level as well. We're also looking at non-white employees in manager positions as well. So I think that we're trying to kind of move the needle in terms of greater representation, which is great, but not the whole story. I think, really where this journey starts of diversity and inclusion is really with inclusion. So in order for us to attract these people into the organization, we really need to be thinking about what are those perks, what are those benefits, what is the culture, kind of how are we showing that we're welcoming, how are we showing what inclusivity means, how are we saying that we're doing more than just putting these statements out publicly, but really representing those statements internally as well, and really creating opportunities for success and mobility within the organization for the diverse talent that we're bringing in. Because at the end of the day, if we're not developing, if we're not innovating, if we're not harnessing those ideas that talent is bringing into the org, then we're not doing it right. So I think that's kind of the second pillar is really kind of those inclusion strategies. And so building out, DEI kind of workshops as part of both a broader manager and leadership development training program, as well as really thinking about what are those core things that we really need to be thinking about as we're creating an inclusive environment. We've been doing a series on allies and accomplices, which has been really, really great. We've been talking about things like identity and privilege and kind of where we can show up as allies, and really kind of seeing how, while it's great because we're giving people frameworks, it's also translating to creating greater trust and vulnerability within the organization, which goes beyond just kind of that core D&I work, but really how our team's functioning together. And so really kind of thinking about what does that look like. And then our third pillar of work is really around our social impact, which is kind of the third part of it, which on maybe the surface, it sounds very different from diversity and inclusion, but because our platform is an inherently inclusive platform and inclusive tool, kind of with this no code kind of system that we have, what we're thinking about is how can we get that out into the communities. And so we have a goal around working with underrepresented minority-owned businesses and nonprofit organizations to really think about how can we start to develop apps with them to be able to build capacity, upskill their teams, and hopefully start to move the needle, kind of in terms of who has access to the tech economy.
Very large bucket of work. Once again.
Yeah. Never bored. Never bored.
Never bored. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think something that has really been striking to me too is the buy-in from every level of the organization on this work, right? So in the Allies and Accomplices workshop that I participated in, there was everyone from the executive leadership team to folks in all different offices to folks at every level of the organization, from co-ops to the CEO participating in this work. And I think that's why it's become a strong sort of thread through the work that we've done over the last year, that it is always there's a lot of buy-in, that we know that it's important at every level.
Yeah, no, I think we've been really lucky there. I think, the message has definitely been clear from the top that this is a priority. It's made it into, kind of our rally cry. And so it's, how we're thinking about, how we're holding ourselves accountable as an organization, which I think is huge. During Black History Month, we did a series of different workshops and activities, and we had, about a third of our workforce participating in that. And I think that's huge. I think that's greater numbers than I've seen in other organizations in terms of kind of showing up for these kinds of activities. And so I think that, we're creating the space for employees to participate. We're creating the space for employees to contribute. We had a great Breaking Through the Binary workshop that happened a couple of weeks ago, and that was really led by members of our Quickbase community, not people from my team. I don't have a team. I'm a single, kind of individual contributor. Yes, one person. But kind of, I think we've almost kind of opened the door to say, like, kind of, what do you want to share? Like, what can you kind of contribute to this work, and really kind of giving people the platform and the spotlight to be able to do that. And I think it was always there, like I've only been in the organization for 8 months. So I don't want to say that this is all because of me coming up and doing whatever. So I think it was there and innate to the organization. And then there was just kind of this open door of permission and acceptance and, welcoming of that kind of activity, that kind of voice within the organization. And people, I think, have really grabbed onto it. And so it's been really awesome to see.
And so in reference to Black History Month and for Women's History Month, you've been doing interviews with folks across the company. You've taken my spot. You're coming for my job. That's what I think.
Never.
But we'd love to hear a little bit about sort of some of the themes that you have seen across these interviews. Maybe we could talk about specifically some that you've seen with the Raising More Voices series that we're doing. And sort of themes you've seen with either the women that work at Quickbase or the Black employees that you've been talking to.
Yeah, so I think there's been a couple of different things. We talked a little bit about mentorship before, and that's a question that we ask, during those conversations as well. And I think it's been interesting to kind of hear people's different experiences. And I think the concept of the kind of rank and mentor has come up in some of those conversations, that really kind of looking at, who are those people that have really kind of stepped up and been kind of role models for some of our folks. It's been interesting. Somebody had mentioned, I think it was Melissa, talked about books and really kind of how she's been really kind of focusing in on books. And I think that really resonated with me. I have a goal. So on top of everything else, I have a goal of reading 100 books this year. And so 25 books a quarter, I just hit number 26 on Wednesday. So I'm
in all your free time.
In all my free time, keeping pace. But I think that's a huge thing to think about. It made me think a little bit differently about kind of mentorship, because I think we always kind of look to like an individual, maybe somebody that we know. And I think kind of what is it, the learnings that we're taking with us from the different pieces of content, the books, the articles, the authors, the bloggers that we're following. I think that really, really resonated with me. I think too, the question that I've been asking a lot is kind of what are the greatest opportunities in tech right now? And I think some themes that have kind of come up through that are really thinking about, thinking about the leaders that we have within the tech space and how are we elevating those leaders. I think thinking about, kind of what does the future of tech look like? And so kind of where are the women? How are we finding the women? How are we thinking differently about, attracting them into the space? I think we've been talking in tech for a really long time that we have underrepresented populations of women and minorities. And that needle hasn't moved or changed. And so, I think kind of with this heightened awareness, with the country kind of woken up, if you will, I think really we have an opportunity to really kind of seize on that moment and maybe explore some new strategies, some new ideas to really think about how we're developing talent, how we're bringing new talent along, and kind of what that future could look like. So the conversations have been really fun, though. I think everybody's really kind of taken a different take. It's been different perspectives every single time. I think there's a big thread of excitement around kind of where we have the opportunity to go, because, these things are being part of the conversation now, where, a year ago, really, it wasn't, people weren't able to kind of say the kinds of things that they were saying, and it wasn't maybe listened to in the same way. So I think kind of this idea of really seizing upon the opportunity to create that kind of change that we want to see, to have a different workforce, a different workplace, kind of as we continue to grow and evolve.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do feel there's a lot of excitement and optimism, I think, for where we're going, which is, it's good. I think we all need it. So, yeah. All right, we're going to ask you the question we ask all the folks that come on this show. It might feel a little different for you, but I'd love to hear how you define agility.
So I think I can think about it in a couple of different ways. And so I think when I think about agility for myself, I think about just kind of how fast this work moves, right? And so I think there's thinking about, what's happening kind of in the regular day-to-day, the things that we had planned to do, right? And so kind of how are we thinking differently about attracting talent, thinking differently about inclusion strategies, kind of the core things, right? But then language is constantly changing, new research is constantly coming out. Things are happening in the world that we have to respond to. And so I think it's kind of being able to pivot and adjust and really be thoughtful in kind of how we're spending our time to make sure that we're, doing the core things that are really going to be that foundation to make the difference, but also taking care of our people and really kind of getting back to that place of psychological safety is is really kind of a primary role I see for myself and for this work. I think when I think about, kind of going broader to Quickbase and kind of D&I, like I keep saying, I'm a team of one, but I've never really felt alone in this space. I think there's a lot of people that are really bought into the work and that have really stepped up to say, like, how can I help? I think of people like Mason Young, who came to me and said, like, I really want to do something with this. Like, how can I help? And, is there a possibility of building an app, to kind of track some of the D&I work that we're doing? And he's jumped in and made sure that it's become a priority for him and his team in the roadmap. And so that's something that I never could have done on my own. And is going to have a great return on investment because it's showing the value of the work and giving a lot of visibility and transparency to what's happening. And that's going to continue to evolve. I'm thinking about the employee resource groups that we're getting ready to do. And so it's a new concept for Quickbase, but something that a lot of organizations have. But really, how do you kind of distribute leadership across the organization so that they can kind of flex into these different roles, and thinking about how it's not just, creating community, but also giving people an opportunity to develop. These leaders of these ERGs will have the opportunity to project manage, to maybe do some public speaking. They'll have exposure to leadership. And so kind of what does that translate in terms of their own development and mobility within the organization? And then I just think, that the space is just really dynamic. I think, if you look at 100 different DEI job descriptions, you're going to see 100 different DEI job descriptions. Like, I think it's not the same at every single place. I think every company is in a different place in their journey. And so just really, being able to flex, I think is a big part of this work and kind of how we're thinking about it, how I'm approaching it. And so it's a little bit different than the technical agility, but I do think, kind of in terms of, how are we using people to create the kind of change, how are we empowering people to do this work, just really kind of multiplying it and really kind of creating that greater impact. While staying kind of up to speed and date on all the other things that are being thrown at us at the same time. So it's kind of like dodgeball.
Yeah. Inclusivity dodgeball, not the most inclusive game. I don't remember.
No,
yeah,
it is not. It is not. So maybe that's not the best analogy. But as I was,
no, I think it's good. I think it's good.
These balls coming at me, and I'm just like, boom, boom,
boom, boom. Yeah, exactly. So this is a question. This is a tough question, but
Okay.
from your perspective, sorry, I'm throwing you the tough ones today.
Okay.
What is one thing that we can talk about maybe tech. Let's stay in tech. That businesses in the tech industry can do to make their organization more inclusive? If you could pick one thing, we've talked a lot about how you do so many things, but what do you think is like the one thing?
So I think this is actually maybe even bigger than tech. I think this is something that I think all organizations, if we could kind of fix this thing, I think we could potentially create a lot of change and shift. And I think it's maybe even bigger than DEI and really kind of an employee engagement strategy that I've been thinking about for a while, is really kind of the role that middle managers play kind of in this space. I think, middle managers, and myself included in a lot of ways, have this interesting role to play where we're responsible for kind of these OKRs or these, goals from the top. And then we're also responsible for kind of this workforce, these individual contributors that are actually doing the work in many cases. And so there's competing priorities. And a lot of times some of these culture initiatives, these D&I initiatives kind of get caught in a bottleneck kind of in that space. And so the value, I think, sometimes gets lost because I think it's one more thing to do. It's going to take away from the core work that needs to get done. But I think what we've seen over and over again is that when employees are given space to kind of explore some of these things, and employees feel that they can bring their whole selves to work, when they have safe spaces and brave spaces to participate in, really great conversations or workshops or trainings, I think it translates into a better employee experience and employees that are excited about their jobs, they're excited about this company that values who they are. And I think sometimes it's tough to balance that. And I'm not saying that we do a bad job at Quickbase. I'm not saying that everybody does a bad job, but what I'm saying is that I think the responsibility of managers in terms of really kind of being that enabler to really kind of move some of this work forward cannot be underestimated. I think we see, the people at the top, kind of our senior leadership team that are really excited. They're super jazzed about this work. And I think there's people kind of cascaded throughout the organization that feel that way too. But I think when we think about kind of where, that permission lies, we kind of talked about, having permission or kind of having that door open to participate in some of these things. A lot of times it is at the manager level. And I find that the teams that have the managers that are the most engaged are the ones that, kind of it translates not just to kind of creating a stronger sense of belonging for the team, but also just better work, better experience for employees overall across the organization. So I think, if we can kind of get that, in place, it might look a little bit different, maybe your work looks a little bit different in terms of how you're spending your time, but I guarantee that people are going to work harder for a company that feels like they value them and that they're ready to go to bat for them.
Yeah. Speaking to a middle manager here, I feel that. Absolutely. That is a really great perspective that does go beyond, right? It doesn't matter the size of your company or the industry that you're in. Yeah, that's a great perspective, Andrea. As always, you always make me think. I appreciate that. So the final question we ask everyone is, how are you doing? I think that as you're trying to make, I don't want to use the wrong term, like psychological safety for everyone else.
Yeah.
And that is, a very large task. And I know your job, we often talk about how there's really no way to get away from DEI work. Not that you'd necessarily want to, but it is a lot of work and exhausting. So how have you been recently or since you've been here?
No, that I appreciate the question. I think it's an interesting one. I was talking to a friend of mine who also works in DEI space, and we were saying that we need like a DEI safe space, like for DEI professionals, because it's been a lot this year. I think, I mentioned it in a recent LinkedIn post, but, I talked about my identity as both a Black woman and an Asian woman. So I identify as multiracial, and particularly for those two identities this year, it's been a lot. And so I think personally, I've been working on boundaries. It is hard to escape it when you're kind of personally experiencing, what's going on in the world, and then having to kind of translate and shepherd, an organization through what's happening in the world as well. And so to kind of have some kind of escape has been really necessary and difficult in times, because I also have 3 children and other things that are going on in the world. So it's crazy, but I've honestly, I've been trying to read a lot of like books that I call candy books, because it has nothing, I'm not learning anything from them except for, fun chick lit. I'm reading a book in a genre that I just learned called Mommy Noir, which is really interesting. So it's like dark psychological thrillers about moms, which is a whole new thing. So that's been interesting to me. But I think the point is I'm doing okay. I think, it's creating, kind of spaces to find a little bit of escape, but also, being as present as I can be in the work, because I do think that makes me a better practitioner, a more authentic and empathetic leader in this space.
Yeah, that's multi-layered. So it is really, I'm glad you're thinking about it though, and making sure you're keeping yourself sort of so that you can show up at your job as in the best way you can. I know I think about that a lot too, being working in a content creation space, right? We were thrown into the forefront at the beginning of this to say all people just now only exist on the internet. So what can you what can you share with them? What community can you build? That's how the show started, as, on a really old webcam on a computer with no microphone, just how can we talk to people about what they're experiencing? And I think building that community has been incredible, but also it has required a new sort of set of skills to create boundaries in your life.
We're definitely flexing in different ways, which I think is great. I think we're growing, I've also been doing a lot of, I got a Peloton recently, so I've been doing lots of Peloton stuff that the instructors always talk about, just if you're not hurting, you're not growing. And so not to say that I'm hurting right now, but I'm definitely stretching and growing right now.
Yeah, you grow through what you go through. That is what I've been telling you.
There you go.
I don't know who I just misquoted, but it certainly was not my idea. But absolutely, Andrea, this has been such a pleasure. Always. Thank you so much for talking with us today, and I'm sure our listeners, watchers are going to absolutely love this interview as much as I did. So
awesome.
To everyone out there, can you let them know where they can follow you? I know that you're pretty active on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. Anywhere else?
Yeah, no, I'm on LinkedIn and super, trying to be more active. This team has been very helpful with me being more active on
We're
LinkedIn.
working
So
on it.
thank you. Thank you. I'm also on Instagram at Party of Forsht. So just my last name, Party of Forsht. We were a party of 4 at one point, so it made sense. Now we're a party of 5. So I probably have to change that. But Party of Forsht is where you can find me. But those are the 2 primary platforms for me.
Awesome. Well, everyone out there, make sure that you like and subscribe. Anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts, you can find us, or on our YouTube channel, or on quickbase.com/podcasts. And we look forward to seeing you again on our next episode. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.